Hello, thanks for joining us. Coming up on today's show.
Junkie walking through the twilight. I'm on my way home.
He helped pen, record and perform some of the most cherished albums of 1970s America with US jazz and soul legend Gil Scott-Heron. After a decade working together, he went on to make music with the likes of Earth, Wind and Fire, Stevie Wonder and Roy Ayers. His tunes have been sampled by Tupac, Kanye West and Common, to name but a few. He's in Paris for a rare concert as part of the Paris-New York Heritage Festival. I'm delighted to welcome Brian Jackson to the show. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm
delighted to have
you.
You're playing at the New York Paris Heritage Festival that starts this week. It's a mix of concerts with a variety of musicians, including Tony Allen and Roy Ayers. You made albums with Gil Scott-Heron that will be around forever, I think. Let's start by listening to one of the early songs you worked on, The Revolution Will Not Be Televised.
The revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be brought to you by Xerox in 4 parts without commercial interruptions. The revolution will not show you pictures of Nixon blowing a bugle and leading a charge by John Mitchell, General Abrams, and Spyro Agnew to eat hog maws confiscated from a Harlem sanctuary. The revolution will not be televised.
Brian, 45 years ago since you recorded your first album together, and Pieces of a Man. Gil was not yet 22, I think you were 19. You co-wrote 7 of the tracks. What do you remember about that time?
Well, I remember it was pretty scary, being 19 and in the studio with the likes of Ron Carter, the great bassist with Miles Davis, Bernard Purdie, the drummer with Aretha Franklin, and the great Hubert Laws, one of the greatest jazz flautists. It was a challenge to keep my composure, but it turned out very well.
The revolution will not be televised. The title was a popular slogan in 1960s Black Power movements in the United States. It was recently used actually for the Black Panther superhero film trailer. Yeah. Did you see that movie? I mean, it's been called a groundbreaking celebration of black culture.
I haven't seen it yet, but I did know. I had tens of friends telling me your song is on in the film, and so I'm looking forward to seeing it when I get a chance.
Brian, Martin Luther King was assassinated 50 years ago this year. 1968 was a year of seismic social and political change across the globe. During that time, you lived in New York, you were growing up. You were bused from a black area called Crown Heights to a white school. Looking back, does that seem like a very different world to the one we live in today?
I would like to say that it was very different. However, I don't see it as being different. In those days, there was a very hard line as far as segregation was concerned, and now that line has softened. But the intent is somehow still the same in a lot of ways.
And from 1971's Pieces of a Man to your last album together, 1980, you documented the state of a nation, tackling topics like Watergate, the Black Panthers, drugs, Vietnam, nuclear power. Another person who's part of the Paris-New York Heritage Festival is the musician Bobby Sanabria. He's the artistic director of the Bronx Music Heritage Center. We had a chat to him about your musical influence.
The music of Gil Scott-Heron and the Midnight Band with Brian as the musical director made an incredible difference, because all of these problems that were happening in the black community, socio-politically, racially, etc., were brought forth to a generation of not only kids from the inner city, but also kids and young people, college-age people, that didn't know all these things were happening, especially in the white community.
Brian, after almost half a century of writing and performing music and lyrics that address the black experience, do you think you've changed things?
I would like to think that, if anything, we helped people to know that they weren't alone, the feelings that they were having and the thoughts they were having about what was going on. They were not in a bubble, that we were all conscious of those things. And in that sense, maybe we did change some things, but there's a lot of work left to do.
The album Winter in America is recognised as one of the most prominent examples of early rap. Your music is often cited as a precursor of the hip-hop we listen to today. Your work has been sampled by artists like Tupac, Kanye West and Common.
Well, a lot of people would like to say that Gil was the godfather of rap, and that, you know, that we were progenitors of that genre. But in fact, spoken word has been around a long time and started with, I mean, before even Langston Hughes. But there was scat. There were people like King Pleasure and James Moody, the last poets who preceded us by a few years. So I think that what we were trying to do was just carry on a tradition of the African griot. And in fact, we like to call ourselves American griots.
Okay, well, let's have a listen to some of those artists who've used your work.
She don't believe in shooting stars, but she believe in shoes and cars. Wood floors in the new apartment, couture from the store's departments.
Here's what I do, I'll take care of you.
Struggle of the brothers and the folks, the lovers of the dope. Experiments to discover hope, scuffle for notes. The rougher I wrote, times was harder. Who will survive in America? Who will survive in America? Who will survive in America? New York, killing. New York, killing me.
It's pretty amazing.
What's it like listening to all of that?
It's fascinating to think that after 50 years that our music is still having an impact upon the generation of artists that are prevalent today, and it's quite an honor.
And in Winter in America, you dealt with the civil rights movement, the post-Watergate recession. Why is that still resonating so loudly in America today?
Unfortunately, because in America, winter has just gotten colder. We had tried to heat it up in the 70s, and there were some pretty oppressive measures taken to suppress protest, and we're trying to get that back. We're trying to revive protest in America, because we, as I said before, we have so much work left to do.
Can that be done through art? What needs to be done?
Oh, it has to be done through art. It has to be done through everything that people do. Life is political. Every movement that you make, every word that you speak, is political, and so we have to make them count.
Now, H2O Gate Blues is one of the most famous and mischievous and political satires. It's sometimes alluded to by hip American history professors. Imagine you were still working with Gil today. What would you be singing about? What would you be writing about?
Oh, well, I think we would be saying that that the revolution, even if it is not televised, or if it will never be televised, it has to go on. The revolution is in the mind, and I think that the most important aspect of revolution is that you make the change within yourself, you make the change within your family, that affects the community affects the greater community, and eventually globally. So it has to start with oneself.
I want to talk now about probably your most famous song, The Bottle, from 1974.
Yeah.
Let's have a listen.
See that black boy over there running scared. His old man got a problem, and it's a bad one. He ain't done pawned off damn near everything. His old woman waiting for bottom. And don't you think it's a crime when time after time after time people in a bottle?
The Bottle is, of course, about the dangers of alcohol. At the time, Gil didn't have a problem with substances, but later on he did. It was a little bit like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It is. One of the greatest talents that Gil had as a writer was the ability to get inside the vision of somewhere that he had no idea about. And he wrote a song called "Your Daddy Loves You" about a man who is about to have a problem and leave his family. And the song was addressed to a little girl. And at that time, he was maybe 8 years out from having a little girl, but everybody thinks that he wrote it for a daughter that he didn't have. You know, so it's just the fact that he's able to do that. I think that is one of the most endearing aspects of his art and his writing.
After a decade together, you broke up.
Mm-hmm.
What happened, and have you made peace with it?
Yeah, it was very difficult. It was drugs. I suppose I can say that. And you know, drugs will change you, and drugs will change your relationships, as they did. But I have made peace with it. It's not something that he did intentionally. You know, it happened, and I'm happy that we had a good 10 years of friendship and camaraderie and brotherhood to write some music that seems to be quite important to people even today.
We're going to fast forward now to some music that's touched a lot of people. In fact, 246 million people have clicked on this video on YouTube. You've chosen it as the song we're going to play out with today. Tell us what you've chosen.
I chose "This Is America" by Donald Glover, or otherwise known as Childish Gambino. I think it has several of the same themes that we tried to present. If you listen to what we were saying, and if you listen to what Childish Gambino is saying in that video, I think that you'll be able to see that there are too many similarities for comfort.
Okay. On that note, we're going to end the show. Thank you very much for coming in and speaking to us, Brian. And you're playing at the Paris, New York Heritage Festival on the 7th of June at Café de la Danse in Paris, and at Mob Hotel just outside the city on the 10th of June. The festival is on in Paris, Montreal, Vancouver and New York until the 22nd of July. Remember our website. We're also on Twitter and Facebook. There's more news coming up on France 24 after this.
This is America. Don't catch you slipping now. Don't catch you slipping now. Look what I'm whipping now. Look how I'm geeking now. I'm so fitted. I'm on Gucci. I'm so pretty. Yeah. I'm gonna get it. Watch me move. This is selling. That's a tool. Yeah. On my Kodak. Black. Ooh, know that. Yeah. Ooh, get it. Work it. 100 bands, 100 bands, 100 bands. Contraband, contraband, contraband. I got the plug on who a hawker. Whoa. They gonna find you